On a heavy afternoon in Fairmont Crest, when the garden shrubs seemed to hold their breath, Sharon sat motionless before the stillness that had just been torn open by a truth surging in like floodwater over a stone embankment. She realized that the moment Vernon admitted his relationship with Barbara was not merely a blow to the heart but a clean slice through her trust, severing the slim thread that had kept her standing for years amid the whispers of prestige and the easy routines of Fairmont Crest. She had loved with a quiet, enduring love, a feeling that lived in habits and breathing in the way her hand rested on the edge of the kitchen counter as she imagined a peaceful dinner. But in an instant, those images changed color, turning alien and chilling. Barbara was no longer a name passing through a few parties, no longer a polite figure in a neutral dress. She became a long crack running the length of the ceiling, hard to notice at first, then spreading wider, splitting plaster, dropping chalky dust into her eyes until every uncertainty fell and stung. Sharon tried to salvage the thought that hearts may wound but reason would keep her upright, yet she immediately grasped the harsher truth beneath. It was trust itself, the charm she had clutched like a talisman, that had steered her to the ledge fastest. She thought about the closeness she believed was theirs alone, those mornings listening to water in the bathroom, the afternoons waiting for messages that never came, the times Vernon stayed silent longer than usual and spoke less about the future, and then she realized the whole chain of days had been rearranged by an invisible hand, restructured into a map of betrayal in which every dot was a signal and every silence a trap. Her anger did not erupt in a scream or a slammed door, it spread like oil, scentless but clinging to every corner of her mind, staining every good thought she had ever reserved for Vernon, squeezing and grinding them down. Sharon found herself pacing the rooms that were familiar and suffocating at once, looking at the neatly hung frames as if they were exhibits from a meticulous fraud. In each photo she tried to read the truth beneath the smiles, tried to hear in her own laughter the timid knock of doubt she had refused to answer. She recognized that the worst pain was not being replaced, but realizing she had voluntarily entered someone else's chessboard with a bare heart, believing her fidelity alone could hold the other person in place. In a world built from ceremonial laughter and bonding dinners, she suddenly understood that trust is not a cord that binds two people, it is often the blindfold that guides one straight into the other's maze. After the confession, Barbara appeared in Sharon's memory as a quiet, persistent figure. A lingering scent on a collar, the vibration of a phone at midnight, the way Vernon's eyes slipped aside when someone mentioned an unexpected meeting, everything became a lead. Sharon could not stop fitting the pieces together, and the more she assembled, the more she saw a thicket of opportunity, advantage, calculation, and hunger. She no longer saw the story as a private wound, she began to recognize it as the tip of something deeper and more dangerous. Barbara had entered Vernon's life not only through attraction but through a skill for swimming in the murk of tacit agreements, a deftness in linking people who stood in discrete positions around the community. Sharon suspected that those meetings had not merely exchanged feelings, they had exchanged information potent enough to rattle the delicate balance among families in Fairmont Crest, among projects and investments, among public promises and the moral anchors everyone displayed. Sharon started to watch, at first unconsciously, then by design. She tracked Vernon's schedule and noticed patterns in his late evenings, dinners whose location shifted at the last minute, phone calls that stretched on but offered nothing specific to recount. She acted as if nothing had changed, kept her rhythm, gave no sign that she was rereading the story on a different level. In silence she arranged fragments, checked what her eyes had seen and ears had heard, set aside the suppositions that jealousy wanted to press down, and slowly outlined a picture in which Barbara was not moving alone. There were faces behind her, hands quietly pushing open doors, tilting mirrors, redirecting meetings so everything would pass without fingerprints. Fairmont Crest, so proud of its immaculate surface, seemed to run on a set of unwritten deals, unnamed rules, nods exchanged beneath warm lights and a practiced, ambiguous smile. She stood before a brutal choice: expose everything at once and shatter the illusion, or swallow the pain and follow, step by step, the path Barbara and Vernon had chosen, until she reached the knots and drew their cords to a single point. She knew she lacked the advantage of the reckless, for the reckless leave seams, so she chose patience, the same patience that once helped her love steadily, now consecrated to another purpose, to place a great mirror before each person and force them to see themselves. The decision did not come cheaply. It required her to live each day as if nothing had happened, to pass through parties, accept congratulations, smile when people praised stability, pretend to care about interior plans, seem serene at casual questions about holidays. And every night, facing the mirror, she saw another gaze in her own eyes, the gaze of someone who no longer believed in the wholeness of love but carried the stubborn will to reach the bottom of the truth. Meanwhile, Vernon changed as well, not with a visible repentance but with a chain of unreadable signs. Sharon saw a man suddenly careful with files he had once neglected, changing storage habits, moving channels of communication, losing a beat when Barbara's name surfaced at communal dinners, then quickly recovering his polished, social voice. That caution did not push Sharon back, it confirmed there was something deeper that had to be peeled away, that the relationship was not a simple misstep but a link in a deliberate arrangement. Each time she recalled Vernon's warm smile in days past, a dark wave of fury rose along her spine. She no longer searched for excuses on his behalf, nor did she torment herself with those self-destructive questions about what she lacked. The question she demanded now concerned motive, cost, networks, the remaining hands unseen. Sharon began to gather not trifling texts that spark a shouting match, but clues that traced the flow of information and benefit. She noticed subtle shifts in the residence council calendar, proposals submitted by faces rarely present, sudden torrents of donations poured into funds bearing the names of art and community, small photo exhibitions in private homes to introduce new patrons. She read local features celebrating unity, and the lines looked to her like fine stitches in a polishing plan. Behind them, familiar names linked to others that should have been unrelated. Sharon borrowed no one's hands and confided in no friend. She alone ran her fingers over the rough map like someone searching a darkened wall for a hidden switch. She knew the time had come to face a private fear, the fear of becoming someone else. Day by day, while eyes around her looked on with the pity reserved for the sensitive, Sharon felt a tender portion of herself being replaced by something reinforced, an inner structure where decisions no longer clung to feelings but to the necessity of a strategy. She wondered whether she was becoming like the very people she despised, whether the road to truth would demand she sacrifice the last trace of a once clear heart. Machination and struggle had never been her taste, but she accepted them as one accepts a painful operation to remove a foreign shard from the chest, knowing it would scar but preferring the scar to the thorn that slices a little more each day. From here the story ceased to be a triangle of a man, a woman, and a third party. It swelled into a many-sided figure in which Barbara was a polished plane reflecting other powers. Sharon suspected Barbara had entered with a map of connections, most of them unequal, in which promises feed one another with fear in favor. Each time Sharon glimpsed Barbara at a public corridor or across a courtyard, she saw in that half-second pause of calculation the uncomplicated composure of someone who had learned to stand precisely where the light fell most beautifully on her shoulder. Sharon saw not merely a wedge in a romance but a negotiator who knew exactly what to take from others to trade for what she needed. She understood that if she reduced the matter to a sentimental tragedy, she would be led in circles through emotional gates. Everything had to be forced back to the launch pad: personal motives, long-term advantage, durable power, and the political borrowing that undergirds a gated community. With that recognition, Sharon climbed the stairs, slow, even, quiet. She built a mental timetable and chose 3 points to open first: the sudden appearance of a scholarship fund named for a deceased member, a string of infrastructure maintenance contracts renewed without a vote, and a small club operating under the banner of community arts but functioning as a discreet meeting hall for a handful of influential families. She pursued these leads like an archaeologist gently teasing apart layers of soil. She read public financials, noted curiously repeating numbers, traced shell companies registered to old acquaintances of Barbara's, drawing the dots tighter into a misted picture whose center was a braided circle of desire, prestige, and advantage. With each piece that clicked into place, Sharon's anger received fresh fuel, not to flare into violence, but to grind down each patch of camouflage with patient heat. The price of this strategy was a series of long nights in a silent colloquy with loneliness. In the mirror she saw dark crescents under her eyes, born not of tears but of tiny glyphs in spreadsheets, of bloodless ties among names, of the polite smile she wore like a mask at gatherings. She looked toward the future and found no promise there, only a long tunnel with a dull glow, unsure whether it was daylight or a blaze. Still she advanced, because retreat meant nailing herself into the role of the betrayed and living off memories that someone else had reached into and needed without permission. While Sharon descended into the underlayers, life above moved in the familiar carousel of fundraisers, exhibits, dinners with business cards, speeches shimmering with words about responsibility and legacy. Barbara appeared with faultless timing, occasionally exchanging the light brush of hands like a ritual, moving between clusters at a pace neither hurried nor slow, leaving behind a scent that made people remember her longer than they meant to. Vernon folded inward, though he maintained his surface polish, and Sharon perceived subtle fractures in his gestures, like a score whose lyrics still matched but that swallowed whole notes. Those fractures were the noiseless proof of a collapse in progress. They made no sound but dragged dignity down a steep stair. The crest arrived when accidents compounded into an event. A repair report seemed to be missent to Sharon, listing subcontractors and a strange handwritten note. A private invitation to an arts gathering used a typeface uncommon in the community, reminding Sharon of a document set in the same font. An anonymous evening call delivered not a voice but a slow, even breathing, as if to say someone was watching her meticulousness from the opposite shore. Sharon understood the bridge had been laid. If she stepped a few paces farther, not only Vernon and Barbara but she herself would stride into the unreturnable light. By now, fear was only a thin soundtrack. Over it, drew a steel outline. She reordered everything into a coherent frame, the private grief set aside like a distorting variable that needed control, the matters of interest and power placed on the table like pieces that must be faced. She identified the leverage point. The weakness did not lie in the noise of banquets but in discreet ties between payer and petitioner, not in conspicuously large sums but in the small, hazy trickles that soft-paved the road for unnoticed deals. She singled out 3 names sitting at hinges, one on a minor district board, one a mid-level arts fund manager, one a newcomer entrepreneur with a press-praised collection of paintings. None were prominent, yet their outputs quietly connected corridors. Barbara drifted down those corridors like wind through curtains, leaving no trace, but tracked in reverse, a ham would sometimes snag on the table's edge. When the balance could no longer hold, Sharon refused a public detonation in the square. She chose small interventions, precise, timely. A question filed to the right committee, not enough for scandal, enough to register her presence. An unsigned letter about process with 2 mismatched figures and a harmless arrow of inquiry. A private note to a neutral member known to hate sloppiness, suggesting the need for cross-checks. She demanded no justice by slogan. She shifted accountability back to its rightful posts, crafting just enough discomfort to slow the gears and force a squeal. In Fairmont Crest, such a noise makes those with things to hide shiver. Under that constriction, Vernon watched his horizon dip. Calls took longer to return, handshakes lost pressure, dates drifted into indefinite postponements. Barbara kept appearing, but Sharon sensed her precision drop by half a beat, like a woman recalibrating her heel on slick wood. They still believed they controlled the choreography, but someone had sprinkled grit along the stage's edge. Sharon knew it was time to return to the original story, the heart. She needed no apology, apologies do not launder stains. She needed clarity to place a period. But even a period would not entirely end things, because beyond it lay the question she had to keep. Was Barbara truly self-propelled, or bait cast by others? What did the network want from Vernon, or had Vernon pitched himself for a price higher than feeling? Had Sharon stopped in time, or was there another darker tier which, if left untouched, would soon repeat itself under a new mask? Night drew its heavy curtain, yet movements continued beneath. Sharon stood in the kitchen that once was refuge, listening to the air conditioner click on and off, to branches scrape the glass, to her heartbeat slowing after the surge. She was not victor or vanquished, she was a survivor of one spiral, preparing for the next. Her anger no longer churned like a blind storm, it settled into a pointing arrow. Her inner conflict did not vanish, but instead of pulling her back into an endless sorrow, it became a warning system, sensitive to other shifts, mapping the zones she must not enter. She looked into the yard where the lights made pale squares and thought about choice. In a world where love, advantage, honor, and safety knot together, pulling one thread tightens another. She had pulled the thread of truth, and now she waited to see whom the knot would cinch and where it would hurt most. In her hands the story did not end with a slammed door and a departure. It continued as an open file, annotated each day with a tight line of ink. Sharon discarded the myth that love can stand in for justice, she kept self-respect as the one bone that must not break. She knew revenge might bring balance but could also make her the mirror of what she despised, therefore she checked every step against a moral map she redrew herself, no flowery borders, only careful marks around forbidden ground. Elsewhere, Barbara might play a new card, switch methods, swap allies, or vanish so another face could take her place. Vernon might slide further or rise suddenly with a final, well-hidden piece. Sharon weighed these scenarios, set them on her inner board, and retreated half a step to leave space for the unforeseeable. In a place like Fairmont Crest, the only certainty is that everything has a price, and what goes unpaid today returns tomorrow to collect, choosing only whose door to knock first. At the end of a long day, Sharon closed her eyes, no prayer, no plea, just breathing measured so memory would not slap her like hot wind. She wondered whether trust can be forged anew, whether a cracked heart can be welded with a flame that does not warp it, whether truth, once exposed, will stand still or cast longer, thicker shadows that draw people into another cul-de-sac. And deep beneath those questions, she quietly buried a seed of peace, too small for the naked eye, hoping that one day, after the storm, it might rise and remind her she had crossed the darkest ground without losing everything. But had the storm passed, or merely changed direction? Was Barbara the season's first gust or the tale of a cyclone sweeping back? Would Vernon pry himself from the net or drag others in to build a human fence? These questions did not need answers yet, because for Sharon the most necessary thing now was to place each step carefully. In Fairmont Crest, even the pavement can secretly shift under anyone who isn't looking closely. And if tomorrow the phone vibrated again in the dark, dropping a fresh link from the long chain of lies, would she pause to listen or walk on, fitting it where it belongs in the picture, taking shape, accepting the price that clarity always demands?